The woman rode into Dry Willow on a cold October afternoon, when the Wyoming wind cut through wool coats like paper and the sky hung low enough to touch. June Wyatt sat tall in her saddle despite the ache in her spine from 3 days' ride. Her broad shoulders squared against the judgment she knew was coming. 28 years had taught her that small towns looked at women like her the same way wolves looked at wounded elk, with a mixture of curiosity and the certainty that something wasn't quite right. Her mare, a sturdy bay named Buttercup, after a gentler time in her life, picked her way down Main Street with the careful steps of a horse who'd carried her rider through worse places than this. June had bought her from a cavalry officer in Nebraska who'd sworn the mare could sense trouble before it came. So far, Buttercup had been wrong only once, and that mistake had cost June her last position at a ranch outside Cheyenne. Dry Willow wasn't much to look at, a scatter of wooden buildings huddled against the prairie like they were trying to hide from the wind. The general store, the saloon with its weather-beaten sign, a boarding house that had seen better days, and at the far end of the street, a small building with a red cross painted on its door. The medical station, June's destination. She dismounted outside the station, her boots hitting the packed dirt with a solid thump. A few men lounging outside the saloon stopped their conversation to stare. June was used to it, at 5 feet 10 inches, with shoulders that could rival most men's and hands scarred from years of work. She drew attention wherever she went. During the war, when she'd worked as a nurse in field hospitals from Virginia to Tennessee, the soldiers had called her Big June, with something close to affection. But the war had been over for years now, and civilian life had different rules for what a woman should be. The door to the medical station opened before she could knock. A thin man with wire spectacles perched on his nose looked her up and down, his mouth pulling into a frown that deepened the lines around his eyes. "Can I help you?" His voice carried the clipped accent of someone from back east who'd never quite adjusted to frontier manners. "I'm June Wyatt. I sent a letter about the nursing position." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I have experience from the war, and references from—" "Miss Wyatt," he cut her off, not even inviting her inside. "I'm Dr. Cornelius Pemberton. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. When you wrote about your experience, I assumed, well, I expected someone more suitable for the position." June had heard this before, in a dozen different towns with a dozen different faces saying the words, "I assure you, Doctor, my qualifications are—" "It's not about qualifications." He adjusted his spectacles, looking anywhere but at her face. "The patients here, particularly the women and children, they need someone who can provide comfort. Someone more maternal, less." He gestured vaguely at her height, her broad frame, the weathered leather of her coat. Intimidating. The word hung between them like a slap. June felt the familiar burn of shame creep up her neck, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that showing hurt only made it worse. "I see." She turned to go, her hand already reaching for Buttercup's reins. "I'm sure you understand." "Doctor," Pemberton called after her, relief clear in his voice. "It's nothing personal. You're simply too substantial for what we need here." June mounted her horse without looking back. She'd camped outside worse towns than this. Another night under the stars wouldn't kill her, though the October cold would make it memorable. She guided Buttercup toward the edge of town, already calculating how far she could get before dark, how many days her supplies would last if she rationed carefully. "Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am," a voice called from behind her. June turned in her saddle to see a man jogging down the street, his long legs eating up the distance. He was tall, taller than her, which was unusual with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't set in such serious lines. "You're the nurse who wrote to Doc Pemberton." He wasn't even breathing hard when he reached her, despite the pace he'd set. June nodded, wary. He made his position clear. "Pemberton's an idiot. The man said it flat out, like stating the weather. "Name's Luke Harlan. I run a horse ranch about 10 miles northwest of here. I could use someone with medical knowledge." For horses, June couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. For horses that used to belong to the cavalry. Wounded ones, mostly. Some shell-shocked. If horses can be such a thing, the army sells them cheap when they can't fight anymore. He paused, seeming to search for words. "I try to give them somewhere to heal, but I don't know the first thing about treating injuries. Lost 3 last month to infections I couldn't stop." June studied him. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his days outside, but his eyes gray like winter clouds held something she recognized, the same look she'd seen in soldiers who'd witnessed too much death and were trying to make sense of it by saving something. Anything. Why would you trust someone Doc Pemberton just turned away? Luke's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Because Pemberton wouldn't know good help if it bit him on his Eastern-educated backside. And because... He looked at her directly, not flinching from her height or her scars or the width of her shoulders. Because anyone who survived nursing in field hospitals has seen worse than a few broken-down cavalry horses. The pay. Room, board, and $2 a week. It's not much, but it's honest work. June considered. She was down to her last $5. Buttercup needed grain, and winter was coming fast. But more than that, she was tired. Tired of sleeping rough. Tired of closed doors and turned backs. Tired of being too much for every place she tried to settle. "These horses," she said carefully, "they're violent." They've been through battles, same as the men who rode them. They kick, bite, panic at loud noises. I've got stable hands who won't go near the worst ones. He paused. That going to be a problem? June almost laughed. After holding down grown men while surgeons sawed through bone. After wrestling delirious soldiers who thought she was the enemy. A few angry horses seemed almost peaceful. No problem at all. Mr. Harlan. Luke, he corrected. And I'll warn you now, the accommodations aren't fancy. There's a lean-to attached to the main stable that's clean and dry. But it's not what you'd call comfortable. I've slept in worse places. This time his smile was real, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. I believe you have. Can you start today? I've got a mare with a festering wound I've been trying to treat, but she won't let me near it. June glanced at the sun, calculating hours of daylight. Lead the way. The ride to Luke's ranch took them through prairie grass gone gold with autumn, past scattered stands of cottonwood and pine that broke the endless horizon. Luke rode slightly ahead on a rangy black gelding, pointing out landmarks, the creek that ran year-round, the hill where lightning had split an ancient oak, the spot where the road forked toward the mountains. How long have you been running this ranch? June asked, partly to make conversation, partly to gauge what she was getting into. 5 years, give or take. Used to run cattle with my wife, but after he cleared his throat. After the fever took her, I couldn't stand the sight of them anymore. Sold the herd, started taking in horses nobody else wanted. June recognized the careful way he talked around his loss. She'd heard it in her own voice when people asked about the war, about why she'd left nursing when she'd clearly been good at it. Some wounds didn't show on the outside. I'm sorry for your loss. It was 3 years ago. He said it like that made a difference. But June knew better. Grief didn't follow a schedule. The ranch, when they finally reached it, was modest but well kept. A main house of logs and chinking, a large stable that looked newer than the house, several corrals, and the promised lean-to attached to the stable's north wall. Luke dismounted and took Buttercup's reins without being asked, leading both horses toward the stable. The wounded ones are in the back section, he explained as they walked. I try to keep them separate from the healthier horses until they're calmer. Some of them. He shook his head. Well, you'll see. The moment June stepped into the stable, she understood. The smell hit her first, not just horse and hay, but the sickly sweet scent of infection, the sour tang of fear sweat. Then the sounds pawing hooves, snorts and whinnies that carried an edge of panic, the thud of bodies against stall walls. "How many?" she asked. 12 right now. 4 are healing well enough. But the others—" Luke led her down the row of stalls. "This is Sergeant. Took grape shot to his left flank. The wound's healed, but he won't let anyone touch that side. Kicks like the devil if you try." June peered into the stall. A big chestnut stood with his left side pressed against the far wall, ears flat against his head. Even from here, she could see the network of scars across his flank, the way he held his weight off his left rear leg. "And this is Brandy." Luke moved to the next stall. "Shell went off near her during a skirmish. She's stone deaf now. Panics if you approach without letting her see you first. Trampled a stable hand in Laramie before they sent her to me." They continued down the line. Each horse had a story, a wound, a reason why the army had given up on them. June felt something ease in her chest. These weren't so different from the men she'd nursed broken, frightened, lashing out at anyone who tried to help. At least horses were honest about their pain. "The mare you mentioned. Last stall. I call her Ghost on account of her color." Luke's expression darkened. "Fair warning, she's the worst of them. Belonged to a colonel who rode her through 3 campaigns. Story goes she stood over his body for 2 days after he was shot. Wouldn't let anyone near him. They had to rope her to get her away." The mare was indeed ghost pale, a gray so light she was almost white. She stood in the back corner of her stall, sides heaving, dark eyes showing too much white, a dirty bandage wrapped around her right foreleg. And even from outside the stall, June could smell the infection. "How long since that bandage was changed?" 4 days. She nearly killed me last time I tried." Luke showed her his left arm, where purple bruises in the shape of teeth marks decorated his forearm. "I've been trying to get her to eat medicine in her feed, but she's too smart for that." June studied the mare, noting the defensive posture, the way she favored the injured leg, the dull coat that spoke of systemic infection. Without treatment, the mare would be dead within the week. "I'll need hot water, clean rags, honey if you have it, and whiskey. For the wound." "For me, but yes, for cleaning." June was already rolling up her sleeves. "And I'll need you to stand at her head. Don't try to hold her, just talk to her. She needs to know someone's there who won't hurt her." Luke looked skeptical but didn't argue. While he gathered supplies, June approached the stall slowly, humming low in her throat an old hymn her mother had sung when June was small and scared of thunderstorms. The mare's ears flicked forward slightly. "That's it," June murmured. "Just a couple of broken souls trying to get by. Aren't we? You lost your person, and I can't seem to find my place. But maybe we can help each other." When Luke returned with the supplies, June was inside the stall. The mare hadn't moved from her corner, but she was no longer showing the whites of her eyes. "How did you—" "Shh." June kept her movements slow. Telegraphed. "Same as with people. You move gentle, talk soft, and remember they're scared before they're mean." What followed was a careful dance of patience and skill. June worked with the same steady calm she'd shown in field hospitals when boys not old enough to shave screamed for their mothers. The mare trembled but didn't strike out as June unwound the filthy bandage, revealing an angry red wound, seeping pus. "Damn," Luke breathed. "That's worse than I thought." June didn't respond, focused on cleaning the wound with careful efficiency. The mare flinched at the touch of whiskey-soaked cloth but held still, as if she understood this hurt was different from the other hurts. When it was done, the wound cleaned, treated with honey for its antimicrobial properties, and wrapped in fresh linen, June stepped back. Her shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air, and her hands trembled slightly from the concentration. "She'll need that change daily for a week, then every other day after that," she said, "and she needs better feed, oats with molasses to build her strength." Luke was staring at her with something like awe. "I've had 3 different men try to treat that wound. She put one through the wall, broke another's ribs." June shrugged. uncomfortable with the admiration. I've had practice with difficult patients. As they left the stable, the sun was setting, painting the sky in the shades of rose and gold. June suddenly realized she had nowhere to sleep except the lean-to Luke had mentioned, and her few possessions were still packed on Buttercup. "The lean-to's not much," Luke said, as if reading her thoughts. "But there's a stove, and I'll bring blankets from the house. Tomorrow we can go to town for whatever else you need." "I don't need much." June retrieved her saddlebags, trying not to think about Dr. Pemberton's words. Too substantial. Intimidating. At least horses didn't care if she was built like a man instead of a delicate flower. The lean-to was indeed basic, a single room with a narrow cot, a pot-bellied stove, a small table and chair, and shelves along one wall. But it was clean and dry, and after weeks of sleeping on the ground, it looked like luxury. Luke helped her carry in armloads of blankets and a pillow that smelled of lavender. "My wife made that," he said, then colored slightly. "The pillow. Never could bring myself to throw out her things." "It's lovely." June held the pillow carefully, recognizing the weight of memory in such ordinary objects. "I'll bring supper in an hour or so. Nothing fancy, probably just beans and cornbread, but it's hot and filling." After he left, June sat on the edge of the cot and finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion of the day. Another town, another rejection, another reminder that she didn't fit in the neat categories the world had created for women. But this might be different. Luke had looked at her and seen not what she wasn't, but what she could do. Outside, she could hear the horses settling for the night, their occasional snorts and stamps oddly comforting. Tomorrow there would be wounds to tend, trust to build, the slow work of healing creatures who'd seen too much violence. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd learned to nurse all those years ago, but maybe that was all right. Maybe broken things understood each other in ways the whole never could. The first week tested June's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. The wounded horses weren't just physically damaged, they carried their battlefield memories in every flinch, every sudden movement that sent them rearing. On her third morning, Sargent had knocked her clean across the stall when she'd moved too quickly on his blind side. She'd picked herself up from the hay, ribs aching, and gone right back to work. "You're limping," Luke observed over breakfast on her 7th day. They'd fallen into a routine of sharing the morning meal in his kitchen strong coffee, biscuits, and whatever preserves were left from summer. "Sargent and I had a disagreement about his morning treatment." June shifted carefully in her chair, trying not to wince. He made his point rather forcefully. Luke frowned. "I told you to call me if they get violent. That's what I hired you for, the medical knowledge, not to get yourself killed." "They're not violent," June corrected, spreading apple butter on her biscuit. "They're terrified. There's a difference." "Not much of one when you're on the receiving end of their hooves." June had heard this argument before, from army surgeons who wanted to put down horses at the first sign of difficulty. "When I worked in the field hospitals, we had a boy couldn't have been more than 17 who'd taken shrapnel to the head. For weeks, every time he woke up, he'd fight us like a wildcat. Broke my nose once. Blacked more eyes than I could count. The other nurses wanted him restrained, but I kept working with him, talking him through the fear. You know what happened?" Luke shook his head. "One day he woke up and asked for his mother. Clear as day. No fighting, just scared and wanting comfort. Turned out every time before that, he'd been waking up thinking he was still in battle." June sipped her coffee. "These horses are the same. They're waking up in battle every day. We just need to convince them the war's over. And if they can't be convinced, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." She stood, gathering the dishes. "But I haven't met a creature yet that didn't want to stop hurting, given the chance." Luke watched her stack the plates with her efficient, careful movements. "You really believe that after everything you've seen?" June paused at the wash basin. Outside the window, the morning sun painted the grasslands gold. "I have to believe it. Otherwise, what was the point of any of it?" That afternoon brought a test of her conviction. She was working with Brandy, the deaf mare, when Luke brought news that made her stomach drop. "There's a man from the army coming tomorrow, Major Garrett. He's checking on the horses they've sold off, making sure they're being treated properly." Luke ran a hand through his hair. If he doesn't like what he sees, he has the authority to reclaim them. Reclaim them for what? Target practice, most likely. The army doesn't waste resources on horses that can't serve. June felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. She'd seen too much waste already young men discarded when their usefulness ended. Veterans begging on street corners because their wounds made them unfit for work. Now horses face the same fate. How many can we get presentable by tomorrow? Presentable? Luke laughed, but there was no humor in it. June, half of them won't even let strangers near their stalls. Then we'll have to change that. She was already moving, her mind cataloging each horse's progress. Get me every stable hand you can spare, and I'll need molasses. Lots of it. Peppermint oil if you have any. What are you planning? To save their lives. What followed was 18 hours of intensive work. June moved from stall to stall, not trying to cure the horses, but simply to make them appear calm enough to pass inspection. She mixed molasses with their feed, knowing the sweet taste would improve their mood. She rubbed peppermint oil on her hands before approaching each horse, creating a consistent, calming scent association. The stable hands, 3 young men who'd initially regarded her with skepticism, soon found themselves drafted into her campaign. She taught them her low humming technique, showed them how to telegraph their movements, how to read the signs of escalating panic before it exploded into violence. Talk to them, she instructed Tom, the youngest hand. Not baby talk, they're not children. Talk like you talk to a friend who's had a bad day. About what? The boy looked doubtful. Anything. The weather, what you had for supper, your sweetheart back in town. June demonstrated with Ghost, keeping up a steady monologue about her grandmother's cornbread recipe while she changed the mare's bandage. They need to hear that life exists beyond fear. By nightfall, June's voice was hoarse and her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed. But there had been progress. Sargent had let Tom brush his right side without kicking. Brandy had taken a carrot from June's hand. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Luke found her in Ghost's stall near midnight, the mare's head hanging over June's shoulder as she worked on the still-infected leg. "You should rest," he said softly. "The Major will be here by 8. "Almost done." June tied off the fresh bandage, noting with satisfaction that the swelling had decreased. "She's turning the corner. I think the infection's localized now instead of spreading." "I brought you something." Luke held out a steaming mug. "Tea, with a splash of whiskey. Figured you could use both." June accepted the mug gratefully, her fingers brushing his as she took it. She was suddenly aware of how she must look covered in hay and horsehair, smelling of stable and sweat, her hair escaping from its practical bun in wild tendrils. "Thank you," she murmured, then felt compelled to add, "I know this isn't what you expected when you hired me. All this extra trouble." Luke leaned against the stall door, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I expected someone who could treat wounds and maybe keep them from dying. I didn't expect—" He gestured at the transformed stable, the calm horses, the very air that seemed lighter somehow. "I didn't expect miracles. It's not miracles, it's just patience and—" "June," he said her name quietly, but it stopped her protests. "Take the compliment. You've earned it." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping their tea while Ghost dozed between them. June found herself stealing glances at Luke's profile, the way the lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he was thinking. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that's not—" "Sarah." The name came easily, like a prayer worn smooth with use. "She was nothing like you, small, delicate, afraid of horses, actually. which was a problem on a cattle ranch. He smiled at the memory. But she was fierce in her own way. When the fever came to town, she insisted on helping nurse the sick. Said she couldn't sit home while neighbors suffered. That's how she caught it. She sounds brave. You would have liked each other. I think both of you seeing people others overlook. Luke straightened. We should both get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be challenging enough without facing it exhausted. June watched him walk back toward the house, his shoulders broad against the starlight. She wondered what it was like to be loved so steadily that your memory became a blessing instead of a burden. Then she shook off the thought. She had no business wondering such things, not when she had 12 horses depending on her to save their lives come morning. Dawn came too soon. June was up before the sun, moving through her morning rounds with practiced efficiency. She'd dressed in her best clothes, a dark blue dress that was only slightly too short and showed wear only at the cuffs. She'd even managed to tame her hair into a respectable bun, though she knew it wouldn't last past the first hour of work. Major Garrett arrived precisely at 8, his uniform crisp despite the dust of travel. He was younger than June had expected, with the ramrod posture of a West Point graduate and eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Harlan, he said, dismounting from a bay gelding that looked like it could run for days without tiring. I trust you have records of the horses purchased from the cavalry. All in order. Major. Luke produced a leather folder. Would you like to review them first or see the horses? The horses. Paperwork can lie. Animals cannot. June stayed back as Luke led the major into the stable, but she could hear every word of their conversation. Her heart hammered as they approached Sergeant's stall. This one was considered irredeemably vicious. Major Garrett said, Injured 3 handlers at Fort Laramie. He's made remarkable progress, Luke replied carefully. My specialist has been working with him. Specialist. June took that as her cue to emerge from the feed room. June Wyatt, Major. I've been treating the horse's medical and behavioral issues. The major's eyebrows rose slightly at her appearance, but his tone remained professional. Miss Wyatt, what is your training? 4 years as a battlefield nurse during the war. Sir, I've found the principles of treating traumatized soldiers apply well to traumatized horses. Indeed. His tone was skeptical. And this horse that injured 3 trained handlers, he's now safe. Would you like a demonstration? Before anyone could object, June opened Sergeant's stall and stepped inside. The chestnut raised his head, ears forward, but didn't retreat to his usual defensive position. Moving slowly, she ran her hand along his neck, then down his scarred left side. Sergeant stood quietly, occasionally turning his head to lip at her sleeve. The key, June said, continuing to stroke the horse, is understanding that aggression comes from pain or fear. Address those, and the aggression resolves itself. She spent the next hour guiding the major through each horse's progress. Brandy demonstrated her newfound trust by allowing the major to approach from her seeing side. Ghost, though still favoring her healing leg, nickered softly when June entered her stall. Even the most skittish of the horses showed marked improvement from just a week ago. But it was the last horse that proved the most powerful argument. A black gelding named Midnight had arrived only 3 days prior. So traumatized, he'd stood in the corner of his stall without moving, refusing food and water. This one scheduled for termination, Major Garrett said, consulting his notes. Completely unresponsive to commands, won't eat. The veterinary assessment was that he'd essentially given up. June entered the stall quietly. Midnight didn't acknowledge her presence, standing with his head low, eyes dull. She simply stood beside him, not touching, barely breathing. Then, so softly the men had to strain to hear, she began to speak. I know, she whispered. I know how it feels when the world gets too loud and too cruel, and the only safe place is inside your own head. I know what it's like to shut down rather than feel one more moment of pain. She continued talking, her voice a gentle stream of understanding. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Midnight's ear turned toward her. Then his head lifted slightly. When June finally extended her hand, palm up, offering nothing but presence, the gelding took a shuddering breath and brushed his muzzle against her fingers. Major Garrett cleared his throat. "Well, it seems the reports of these horses' unfitness have been greatly exaggerated." "They're not fit for battle," June said, still standing with Midnight. "They never will be again, but they're fit for life." "Major, surely that counts for something." The Major made notes in his leather journal, his expression thoughtful. "The Army's position has always been that horses are equipment. When equipment breaks beyond repair, it's discarded. With respect, sir, that thinking is why you have so many broken soldiers drinking themselves to death in alleys from here to Washington." June's voice carried an edge now. "These horses served. They gave everything they had. Don't they deserve a chance to heal?" "You speak from experience, Miss Wyatt. I've held too many dying boys who gave everything for their country, only to be forgotten when they couldn't give any more. If we can do better by horses than we did by them, shouldn't we?" Major Garrett closed his journal. "Mr. Harlan, I'll be recommending that your operation continue. In fact, I may send more horses your way. The Army is reconsidering its position on rehabilitation versus termination." After he left, Luke found June still in Midnight's stall, the black gelding eating hay from her hand. "You did it," he said. "You saved them all." "We did it," June corrected. "I couldn't have managed without you and the hands backing me up." "June." Luke entered the stall, something in his expression making her heart skip. "What you said to the Major about broken soldiers, I shouldn't have. It wasn't professional." "It was true, and it was brave." He stood close enough that she could smell the leather and soap scent of him. "You're quite something, June Wyatt." She ducked her head, uncomfortable with the admiration in his voice. "I'm just doing my job." "No." His hand covered hers where it rested on Midnight's neck. "You're doing much more than that." They stood that way for a moment, connected by touch and understanding, while around them 12 broken horses continued their slow journey back to trust. Outside, the October sun climbed higher, warming the stable and casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. And June thought maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where being too substantial wasn't a flaw, but a strength. The evening routine had become sacred to June. After the horses were fed and settled, after the last bandage was changed and the stable doors secured, Luke would appear at her lean-to with supper. Sometimes it was stew from the pot that seemed to simmer eternally on his stove. Other nights, like this one in late November, he brought cornbread still warm from the oven and a jar of beans seasoned with salt pork. "You don't have to do this," June said for perhaps the 100th time as he set the food on her small table. "I can manage my own meals." "I know you can." Luke settled into the chair across from her, his chair. She'd come to think of it, though he'd never claimed it as such. But cooking for one is lonely business. Sarah always said food tastes better when it's shared. June broke off a piece of cornbread, noting how he'd remembered she liked it without sugar, just the way her mother used to make it. These small considerations undid her more than grand gestures ever could. In the 2 months since she'd arrived, Luke had learned her preferences without seeming to try strong coffee. No milk, her tendency to work through lunch unless reminded, her habit of humming hymns when concentrating. "Tell me about your family," Luke said suddenly. "You never speak of them." June's hand stilled on her spoon. "Not much to tell. My parents died when I was 16. Lung fever took them both within a week of each other." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." She took a bite of beans, chewing slowly. "I went to live with my aunt in Philadelphia after that. She's the one who suggested I train as a nurse. Said I had the constitution for it. Meaning I was too big and plain to catch a husband, so I'd better find another way to support myself." The old hurt colored her voice despite her attempt at lightness. She wasn't wrong. The war came, and I was good at nursing. Strong enough to lift grown men, steady enough to assist in surgeries, practical enough not to faint at the sight of blood. Luke's jaw tightened. Your aunt sounds like a fool. She was honest. That's more than most gave me. June pushed beans around her plate. Do you know what they called me in the field hospital's Big June? Like I was a landmark instead of a person. The soldiers meant it kindly, I think, but it still hurt. She looked up, surprised by his understanding. Yes, Sarah was beautiful, Luke said after a moment. Delicate as a bird, graceful as a dancer. People wrote poems about her eyes. And you know what, none of it mattered when the fever took her. All that beauty, all that delicacy, it just made her fade faster. Luke, I'm not saying this to diminish her memory. I loved her with everything I had, but I learned something watching her die. He met June's eyes directly. Strength matters. The ability to endure, to keep standing when everything's trying to knock you down, that matters. Your aunt was wrong. June, you're not to anything. You're exactly enough. June felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. You're too kind to me. No. His voice was firm. I'm finally being kind enough. A comfortable silence settled between them as they finished eating. Outside, wind rattled the lean-to's windows, promising snow before morning. June found herself dreading the moment Luke would leave, return to his empty house, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the sleeping horses. I should check on Ghost before bed, she said, standing abruptly. Her leg's been draining more than I like. I'll come with you. They walked to the stable together, their breath visible in the cold air. The horses stirred at their approach, recognizing their footsteps. Ghost nickered softly from her stall, her pale coat almost luminous in the lamplight. Look at that. Luke's voice held wonder. She's glad to see you. It was true. The mare who'd once cowered in the corner now pressed against the stall door, seeking June's touch. The transformation still amazed June, even after weeks of daily progress. She's healing, June murmured, running her hands over the mare's neck. Inside and out. Thanks to you. Thanks to patience, and time, and... She hesitated, then forged ahead. And having someone believe she was worth saving, Luke moved closer, ostensibly to examine Ghost's leg, but really, June suspected, to be near. She was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth he radiated in the cold stable, the way his hand brushed hers as they both reached for the mare. June. His voice was low, careful. These past months, having you here, it's been like the house can breathe again. Like I can breathe again. Luke, You don't have to say anything. I know it's too soon, too much. You're my employee, and I'm probably making things difficult for you. He stepped back, giving her space. I just needed you to know that you've brought something back to this place. Something I thought was gone forever. June's throat felt tight. She wanted to tell him how she looked forward to their evening meals, how his faith in her abilities had begun to heal wounds she'd carried for years, how sometimes she caught herself watching him work with the horses and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with friendship. Instead, she said, Ghost's leg is healing well. Another week and we can stop the daily bandaging. Luke smiled, recognizing her retreat. That's good news. Major Garrett will be pleased when he visits next month. They finished checking the horses in companionable silence. But something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement of possibilities, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition that loneliness shared was somehow easier to bear. As they walked back toward their separate dwellings, snow began to fall fat, lazy flakes that caught in June's hair and dusted Luke's shoulders. At the door to her lean-to, he paused. June. What you said about having someone believe you're worth saving, it goes both ways. You know. Before she could respond, He touched the brim of his hat and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with the snow melting on her cheeks and her heart beating too fast for comfort. Inside, she found something on her pillow that hadn't been there before, a small wrapped package. With trembling fingers, she opened it to find a new hairbrush, the silver handle engraved with her initials. The note was in Luke's careful script. For the woman who's exactly enough. L. June sat on her narrow bed, holding the brush, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to cry. Not from hurt or disappointment, but from the overwhelming realization that somehow, in this unlikely place with these broken horses and this grieving man, she'd found something she'd never dared to hope for. Acceptance. The next morning brought 6 inches of snow and a new challenge. Tom, the youngest stable hand, arrived breathless with news from town. There's talk. Miss June. Some of the townspeople are saying Mr. Harlan's running some kind of improper establishment out here. June's blood chilled. What do you mean? The boy's ears reddened. On account of you living here, unmarried woman, unmarried man, people are saying things. What kind of things? Luke's voice came from behind them, cold as the winter air. Tom looked miserable. Just talk, sir. But Mrs. Morrison at the general store says she won't sell supplies to anyone supporting immoral behavior. And Reverend Phillips mentioned it in his sermon last Sunday about the dangers of temptation and maintaining proper Christian distances. June felt the familiar sick feeling in her stomach. It had happened before. In other towns, whispers that grew to rumors that became reason enough to drive her out. But this time it was worse, because this time she had something to lose. I should go, she said quietly, if my presence is damaging your reputation. No. Luke's response was immediate and fierce. Tom, go muck out the stalls. June, come with me. He strode toward the house, with June hurrying to keep pace. Once inside, he began pulling on his good coat, the one he wore to town. What are you doing? What I should have done the day you arrived. He grabbed his hat. I'm going to town to set some things straight. Luke, no, it will only make things worse. Worse? He turned on her, eyes blazing. Worse than letting them drive away the best thing that's happened to this ranch since... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I won't let them do this. June, not to you. It's not worth. You are worth it. He said it simply, finally, like stating the weather. You're worth defending. You're worth fighting for. And if I have to tell every gossiping busybody in Dry Willow that you sleep in the stable while I sleep in the house, that you've saved 12 horses they would have let die, that you're the most decent person I know, then that's what I'll do. June stared at him. This man who'd lost his beloved wife, who'd retreated to this ranch to grieve in private, now ready to battle an entire town for her honor. I'll come with you, she heard herself say. No, you stay here and tend the horses. They need you. He moved toward the door, then paused. But June, when I get back, we're going to talk about making some changes. Proper ones. The kind that will shut every wagging tongue in Wyoming. He was gone before she could ask what he meant, leaving her standing in his kitchen with her heart racing and her mind spinning. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse and ride toward town, his back straight with determination. June returned to the stable, trying to focus on her work, but her hands shook as she measured out grain. The horses sensed her distress, growing restless in their stalls. Even Ghost, usually calm now, pawed anxiously at the ground. It's all right, June murmured, as much to herself as to the mare. Everything's going to be all right. But she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Luke returned from town as the sun was setting, his jaw tight and his knuckles scraped. June was in Midnight's stall, working the gelding through his evening exercises, when she heard the thunder of hooves in the yard. She emerged to find Luke dismounting, his coat torn at the shoulder. What happened? She was at his side before she'd consciously decided to move. her hands reaching for his face where a bruise was already blooming along his jaw. Had a discussion with Reverend Phillips. Luke winced as she probed the bruise. He felt the need to quote scripture about proper behavior. I felt the need to remind him about casting first stones. Luke, you didn't... I didn't start it. He caught her hand where it rested against his face, holding it there. But I finished it. June, I need to tell you something. Inside, she said firmly. You're freezing, and that cut needs tending. In the kitchen, she worked with the same efficient care she showed the horses, cleaning the scrape on his jaw while he sat quietly at the table. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired than she'd ever seen him. Talk, she commanded, dabbing whiskey on the cut. Luke hissed at the sting, but didn't pull away. The whole town was in an uproar. Mrs. Morrison had gathered a group of the church ladies to discuss the situation. They were talking about petitioning the mayor to have you removed from the area. June's hand stilled. I see. No, you don't. He caught her wrist gently. I told them the truth, that you're the most skilled healer I've ever seen, that you've saved horses they wrote off as worthless, that you work from dawn to dusk and ask for nothing but basic shelter and honest wages. And they said, that none of that matters if you're living in sin. His laugh was bitter. As if they have any idea what goes on here. As if they care about anything but their own narrow-minded gossip. June pulled her hand free, stepping back. They're not entirely wrong. It doesn't look proper. A woman living on a man's property. I understand their concern. Their concern? Luke stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. June, they don't know you. They don't know how you sing to Ghost when you think no one's listening. They don't know how you gave your last dollar to Tom when his mother was sick. They don't know how you stay up all night with a colicking horse because you can't bear to see anything suffer. None of that changes what it looks like. Then we change what it is. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Luke took a breath, seeming to gather courage. I rode out to Judge Harrison's place after leaving town, asked him what would need to happen to stop the talk permanently. June's heart began to pound, and he said there were two options. Either you move to town and ride out daily, which would be impossible in winter and dangerous besides, or... He paused, then forged ahead. Or we make it proper, legal, binding. The word he wouldn't say echoed louder than the ones he spoke. Marriage. He was talking about marriage. Luke, her voice came out strangled. You can't be serious. Why not? Because you loved your wife. Because I'm not the kind of woman men marry. Because you'd be doing it for the wrong reasons. Would I? He moved closer, and June found herself backed against the kitchen wall. June, I've watched you for months now. I've seen you gentle the wildest horse with patience. I've seen you work until your hands bleed and never complain. I've seen you take every cruel word this world throws at you and still get up the next morning with kindness in your heart. That's not... I'm not finished. His hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I've seen you in the morning when your hair won't stay pinned and you're muttering at it like it's personally offended you. I've seen you sneak extra oats to Sergeant when you think I'm not looking. I've seen you cry over Ghost's progress and try to hide it because you think tears are weakness. Luke, please. I've seen you, June Wyatt, all of you, and I... He stopped, struggling for words. I can't say I love you the way I loved Sarah. That was young love. First love. The kind that believes the world is nothing but sunshine. This is different. This is choosing to build something from broken pieces. This is knowing exactly how much it costs to care and choosing to do it anyway. June felt tears streaming down her face. You don't know what you're saying. You don't want someone like me. You want someone small and pretty who can host tea parties and won't embarrass you at church socials. I want someone who understands that sometimes the best you can do is make it through the day. I want someone who looks at broken things and sees possibility. I want... His thumbs wiped at her tears. I want you. June. Not because the town says I should, not because it's proper, but because these past months have shown me what partnership really means. I don't know how to be a wife, she whispered. I don't know how to be delicate or graceful or any of the things. I'm not asking you to be those things. I'm asking you to be yourself, to keep being the woman who saves horses and tends wounds and makes this empty house feel alive again. June looked at him, this good man offering her more than she'd ever dared dream of. Part of her wanted to run, to saddle Buttercup and disappear into the prairie before she could disappoint him. But a bigger part, the part that had learned to trust again these past months, wanted to stay. The townspeople can go to hell. The profanity from mild-mannered Luke startled a laugh from her. I mean it. June, if they can't see your worth, that's their blindness, not your failing. And if I'm a terrible wife, if I can't learn to cook properly or keep house the way Sarah did, then we'll hire someone to cook and keep eating beans and cornbread. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. June, I'm not asking you to replace anyone or become someone you're not. I'm asking if you might consider building a life with me, a real life, where the horses are ours, the ranch is ours, the future is ours. June closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hands on her face, the solid presence of him. When she opened them, his gray eyes were waiting, patient as always. I don't love you, she said quietly. Not yet. I care for you, more than I probably should. But love, I don't know if I remember how to do that. That's fair, more than fair. He didn't move away. I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for a chance, for time, for the possibility that two people who've been broken might build something whole together. And if we can't, then we'll face that honestly, like we've faced everything else. His hands dropped to take hers, work-roughened fingers intertwining. But June, what if we can? What if this is the second chance neither of us thought we'd get? Outside, snow began to fall again, muffling the sounds of the night. In the stable, the horses settled into their evening routine, safe and warm. And in the kitchen of a ranch house that had known too much sorrow, two people stood on the edge of possibility. I need time, June finally said, to think, to be sure I'm not taking advantage of your kindness. My kindness, Luke laughed, but it was gentle. June, you've given me back my purpose. You've made me remember why saving things matters. If anyone's taking advantage here, it's me. A week, she said. Give me a week to think. Take all the time you need. He squeezed her hands once before letting go. I'll be here. The horses will be here. Nothing has to change unless you want it to. But things had already changed, and they both knew it. The careful boundary between employer and employee, between friendship and something more, had been crossed. There was no going back, only forward into uncertain territory. June retreated to her lean-to, her mind spinning. She sat on her narrow bed, still holding the silver hairbrush Luke had given her, and tried to imagine a future she'd never allowed herself to want. A home that was truly hers. A partner who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw. A life built on mutual respect and shared purpose. It terrified her more than any battlefield surgery ever had. Outside her window, she could see the warm glow of Luke's kitchen window. Was he sitting there now, wondering if he'd said too much, or was he as certain as he'd seemed? Sure that offering her his name and his protection was the right choice. A soft nickering from the stable drew her attention. Ghost, probably, sensing the disruption in their evening routine. June smiled despite her turmoil. The horses needed their evening check, regardless of marriage proposals and uncertain futures. She pulled on her coat and made her way to the stable, finding comfort in the familiar routine. Ghost greeted her with a gentle nudge, her leg now fully healed but for a faint scar. Sergeant actually stepped forward in his stall, seeking attention. Midnight, who'd been nearly catatonic when he arrived, now watched her with bright, interested eyes. "What do you think?" June asked them. "Should I say yes to your human? Should I risk everything on the chance that maybe, just maybe, I could have a real home?" The horses, wisely, offered no advice beyond their quiet presence. But as June moved among them, checking water, adjusting blankets, offering the comfort of routine, she realized something. She'd already chosen. Every morning when she woke eager to see what progress the horses had made, every evening when she looked forward to Luke's quiet company, every moment when this place felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived since her parents died, she'd been choosing. The question wasn't whether she cared enough to say yes. The question was whether she was brave enough to admit that she already had. The accident happened on a clear December morning, 3 days after Luke's proposal. He'd been working with a new arrival, a stallion the army had warned was difficult, when the horse spooked at a flying piece of paper. June heard the commotion from across the yard where she was treating Brandy's cracked hoof. "Easy, easy now," Luke's voice, then a crash that made her blood freeze. She ran, her medical bag forgotten, to find Luke pinned against the fence, the stallion rearing and striking. Without thinking, June vaulted into the corral, placing herself between Luke and the panicked horse. "Back!" She made herself large, arms spread wide, voice commanding. The stallion wheeled away, and she pressed her advantage, driving him to the far side of the corral. Only then did she turn to Luke. He was conscious but pale, clutching his left side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Don't move!" June's battlefield training took over. She knelt beside him, gently moving his hand to assess the damage. The hoof had caught him just below the ribs, tearing through his shirt and the flesh beneath. Deep, but not fatal if treated properly. "June." "Quiet, Tom." The stable hand appeared at her shout. "Get my medical bag from the barn, now, and send someone for hot water and clean linen." She pressed her hands against the wound, applying steady pressure. Luke's eyes found hers, glazed with pain but aware. "The stallion is fine. You're the one bleeding all over your good fence." She kept her voice light, but her hands trembled slightly. "This is what happens when you try to handle the difficult ones without me." "Wanted to prove I could still—" He winced as she adjusted the pressure. "Prove you're foolish. Congratulations. Mission accomplished." The words came out sharper than intended, fear adding an edge to her tone. "You hired me to handle the dangerous horses. Remember?" Tom returned with her bag, and June worked quickly, cleaning and assessing the wound. It was deep but clean, missing anything vital by inches. She'd sewn up worse, much worse, but never on someone who mattered this much to her. "This is going to hurt," she warned, threading a needle with silk suture. "Can't be worse than listening to Reverend Phillips lecture on propriety." Even in pain, he was trying to make her smile. "Don't make me laugh while I'm sewing you up." But her hands were steadier now, falling into the familiar rhythm of treating wounded flesh. "And don't you dare compare my needlework to his sermons." It took 12 stitches to close the wound properly. Luke bore it with gritted teeth and white knuckles, but he didn't make a sound beyond the occasional sharp breath. When she was done, June wrapped his ribs with clean bandages, her hands gentle now that the immediate danger had passed. "You'll need to rest," she said, helping him to his feet. "No lifting, no riding, and definitely no wrestling stallions for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He leaned heavily on her, and she took his weight without hesitation. "The horses. We'll be fine. Tom and I can manage." She guided him toward the house, acutely aware of his warmth against her side, the way he trusted her to support him. "The question is whether you can manage to follow orders." "I'm not good at being idle." "Then you'll learn." They'd reached the porch steps. "Luke, that was too close. If the stallion had struck a few inches higher—" But he didn't. Luke paused, turning to face her despite the obvious pain it caused. Because you were there. You put yourself between me and 1,000 pounds of angry horse without even thinking about it. Of course I did. The admission came without thought. I couldn't let anything happen to you. They stood there on the porch, the December air sharp around them. And June realized what she'd just said, what it meant. June. Inside, you need to lie down before you tear my beautiful stitches. She got him settled in his bed, the first time she'd been in this part of the house. The room was simple, almost austere, with only a photograph of a delicate-looking woman on the dresser to show someone else had once shared this space. Sarah, June assumed, forever young and lovely in sepia tones. The laudanum is in the kitchen cabinet, Luke said, following her gaze to the photograph. But I'd rather not. I know. You'd rather feel the pain than fog your mind. She'd seen it in soldiers, too. The ones who'd rather hurt than lose themselves to the drugs. But you need rest to heal. I'll make willow bark tea instead. It'll take the edge off without making you senseless. While the tea steeped, June found herself moving around Luke's kitchen with surprising familiarity. She knew where he kept his cups, how he organized his pantry, the way the stove door stuck unless you lifted it just so. When had this become comfortable? When had his space started feeling like something she belonged in? She returned to find Luke struggling to sit up, his face tight with pain. What are you doing? Trying to see the stallion. Make sure he's calm. The stallion is fine. Tom's keeping an eye on him. She pressed him back against the pillows. None too gently. You, however, are going to lie still and drink this tea like a reasonable person. Yes, ma'am. But he was smiling as he said it, and June felt that dangerous warmth in her chest again. She stayed while he drank the tea, ready to catch the cup if his hands shook, but Luke managed it himself, though she could see the effort it cost him. June, he said when the cup was empty. About what I asked you. I don't want you to feel obligated because of this. If anything, it proves you deserve better than a rancher who can't even handle his own horses anymore. Stop! She took the cup from him, setting it aside with careful movements. You're hurt and tired and saying foolish things. I mean it. You saved my life just now. I won't have you thinking you owe me anything because... June silenced him the only way she could think of by pressing her lips to his. It was awkward and unpracticed. Her first kiss since she was 17 and thought she understood the world. But Luke's hand came up to cup her cheek, and suddenly it wasn't awkward at all. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise. I don't kiss men I feel obligated to, she said firmly. I kiss men I can't bear to lose. There's a difference. June. Sleep now. She stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that weren't quite steady. I need to check on the horses, and you need to rest so those stitches can do their work. Will you have supper with me here? I mean, since I can't come to you. I'll bring a tray later. She paused at the door. And Luke, the next time you want to prove something, try flowers. They're much less likely to require stitches. His laugh followed her out, warming her more than the winter sun. The next days fell into a new rhythm. June tended Luke along with the horses, bringing meals, changing bandages, forcing him to rest when he tried to do too much too soon. The stable hands stepped up admirably, following her directions without question, and the horses seemed to sense the need for gentler behavior. On the third evening, as June unwrapped Luke's bandages to check the healing, he caught her hand. It doesn't have to be a real marriage, he said quietly. If that's what worries you, we could have an arrangement, a partnership. You could have your own room, your own life. I want you to be able to stay without the town making it impossible. June continued her work, cleaning around the stitches with careful fingers. The wound was healing well. No sign of infection. Is that what you want, an arrangement? I want you to be happy. I want you to feel safe. Everything else is secondary. That's not what I asked. She applied fresh salve, her touch clinical despite the intimacy of the moment. What do you want? Luke Harlan. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I want to wake up knowing you're here. I want to share meals without wondering if it's the last one. I want to build something with you, not just the ranch, but a life. I want. He caught her hand again, holding it against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. Quick and strong. I want whatever you're willing to give, whether that's a business partnership or something more. June looked at their joined hands, his weathered and scarred from ranch work, hers bearing the permanent stains of iodine and carbolic, both showing the evidence of lives spent in service to others. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about what marriage means, about what I could offer you. June, let me finish. She took a breath. I'll never be delicate. I'll never host tea parties or gossip with the church ladies. I'll probably scandalize the town every other week just by being myself. I'll work with the horses until my hands are too old to hold a lead rope, and I'll always smell faintly of the stable. I know all of that. But, she continued, meeting his eyes, I'll stand beside you through whatever comes. I'll tend your wounds and celebrate your victories. I'll make sure you eat when you forget and rest when you're hurt. I'll care for what's yours like it's mine, because it already feels like it is. Is that a yes? June thought of the week she'd asked for, the time to think and decide. She'd needed less than an hour. Really, the moment she'd seen him hurt, when her world had narrowed to keeping him safe and whole, she'd known. That's a yes, she said quietly. If you're certain you want a wife who's more comfortable with horses than high society. I'm certain I want you. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her palm with a gentleness that made her shiver. Horses and all. Then yes, yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to... She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for the possibility stretching before them. Yes to everything. Luke finished for her. Good, because I already asked Judge Harrison to come by next week. Seemed presumptuous, but I was hopeful. You impossible man. But she was smiling as she said it. And when he tugged her down for another kiss, careful of his healing ribs, she went willingly. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. In the stable, the horses settled for the night, safe and warm and healing. And in the house that had known too much sorrow, two people began to build something new from the broken pieces of their pasts. The fever came in the depths of the night, 5 days after the accident. June woke to the sound of Luke's voice, not calling for her, but rambling in delirium. She grabbed her medical bag and ran to the house through swirling snow, her nightgown inadequate against the Wyoming winter. She found him tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, his skin burning with fever, the careful stitches angry and red with infection. Her heart dropped even as her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah, his eyes were open but unseeing. Sarah, I'm sorry. Should have been there. Should have... It's June, she said firmly, checking his temperature with the back of her hand. Too high. Dangerously so. Sarah's not here. Luke, it's June. But he was lost in his fever dreams, reliving his wife's final days. June had seen this before in the field hospital's infection taking hold, sending men back to their worst moments. She knew what needed to be done, had done it hundreds of times, but never when the patient meant this much to her. She worked through the night, alternating between cold compresses to bring down the fever and hot poultices to draw out the infection. She cleaned the wound again, finding the source of trouble a small piece of fabric from his shirt, driven deep by the horse's hoof, once removed. Fresh blood welled up, clean and red. That's it, she murmured, working by lamplight. Let it bleed clean. Let the poison out. Luke tossed and muttered, sometimes calling for Sarah, sometimes for horses long dead, sometimes for June herself. During the worst of it, when his temperature spiked and his breathing grew labored. She found herself praying something she hadn't done since the war. "Not him," she whispered. "I've lost enough. Don't take him too." Dawn came gray and bitter, but Luke's fever had broken. He lay still now, breathing easier, though he hadn't yet returned to consciousness. June stayed by his bedside, monitoring his pulse, checking the wound, willing him to wake. Tom arrived to tend the horses, took one look at her haggard face, and promised to handle everything. "You just worry about Mr. Luke, Miss June. We've got the rest." The day crawled by. June dozed fitfully in the chair beside Luke's bed, jerking awake every time his breathing changed. She forced herself to eat the soup Tom's mother sent over, knowing she needed strength for whatever came next. It was late afternoon when Luke finally stirred, his eyes focusing on her face with blessed clarity. "June!" His voice was hoarse, confused. "What? Why are you—" "You developed an infection." She smoothed the blankets, needing something to do with her hands. "The fever was bad. You were delirious." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment. "What did I say?" "Nothing that matters." She wouldn't tell him about calling for Sarah, about the guilt that had poured out in his fevered rambling. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by that stallion instead of just kicked." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "The horses are fine. Tom's handling everything." She checked his temperature again, relief flooding through her at the normal warmth. "The fever's broken. With rest and care, you should recover fully." "You stayed with me." It wasn't a question. "Of course I stayed." The words came out more forcefully than intended. "Where else would I be?" Luke studied her face, taking in the shadows under her eyes, the worry lines that hadn't been there days ago. "I scared you. Infections are serious. I've seen strong men die from less." She stood abruptly, busying herself with tidying the already neat room. "You need more willow bark tea. I'll make—" "June." His voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you." "It's what I do," she said without turning. "It's what I'm good at." "No." The certainty in his voice made her look back. "It's who you are. And He paused, seeming to gather strength. "In my fever, did I talk about Sarah?" June's silence was answer enough. "I thought so. I could feel her. You know, not like a ghost, but like a memory so strong it felt real." He met June's eyes. "She would have liked you. Would have bullied me into courting you properly instead of proposing in my kitchen like a fool." "Luke." I need to say this while I'm clear-headed. He struggled to sit up despite the pain, and this time June moved to help him, propping pillows behind his back. "I loved Sarah with everything I had. Part of me always will. But that's not why I asked you to marry me, and it's not why I want you to stay." June perched carefully on the edge of the bed, her heart racing. "Then why?" "Because you make me want to live forward instead of backward. Because watching you with the horses reminds me why healing matters. Because—" He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "Because somewhere between you arriving here angry and proud and desperate, and you saving my life twice over, I realized I can't imagine this place without you." "I'm not her," June said quietly. "I'll never be small and delicate and—" "I don't want you to be her." His grip on her hand tightened. "I want you to be you, the woman who stands between me and danger without thinking twice, the woman who brings broken creatures back to life, the woman who stayed up all night fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." June felt tears prick her eyes. "In your fever, you kept apologizing to her, saying you should have been there, should have saved her." "I couldn't save her." The old grief was there in his voice, but tempered now with acceptance. "I couldn't fix what was killing her, couldn't love her back to health. It nearly broke me. That failure, it wasn't a failure. Sometimes people die despite our best efforts. It's not about deserving or failing. It's just life. June thought of all the boys she'd lost in the hospitals. Despite her skill and dedication, the miracle is that sometimes they live. Like I did, because of you. Because you're stubborn, she corrected, but she was smiling through her tears. And because you have work to finish, horses to save, a ranch to run, a wife to marry. Is that still yes, even after seeing me at my worst? June thought about the night just past, the terror of possibly losing him, the fierce protectiveness that had driven her through exhaustion, the moment his fever broke and she'd finally been able to breathe again. Especially after seeing you at your worst, she said. That's when you know what really matters. Luke brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with reverent gentleness. Judge Harrison. Can wait until you're healed. I won't have you tearing your stitches at your own wedding. She stood, all business again. Now, you need that tea, and some broth if you can manage it, and then more rest. June, he called as she reached the door again. What made you stay, not just last night, but here, after the town was so cruel, after I could only offer you a lean-to and hard work? What made you give us a chance? She considered the question, thinking back to that first day, the wounded horses and the quiet man who saw them as worth saving. You looked at me and saw what I could do, not what I couldn't be, she said finally. Do you know how rare that is? How long I'd been waiting for someone to see me that way? As long as I'd been waiting for someone to make me remember why mornings matter, Luke said softly. They held each other's gaze across the room. Two people who'd found something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Rest now, June said, her voice gentle. I'll be here when you wake. Promise. I promise. She kept that promise through the long days of his recovery. The infection cleared. The wound healed cleanly. And slowly, Luke regained his strength. June moved between the house and stable, caring for both man and horses with equal dedication. The stable hands grew used to taking her direction, and even some townspeople began to nod respectfully when she made her supply runs. One evening, as Luke took his first walk to the stable since the accident, they found Ghost waiting at her stall door, nickering softly at their approach. She missed you, June said, watching Luke carefully for signs of fatigue. She missed us, he corrected, noting how the mare's attention moved between them both. She knows we're a pair now. Do we? June asked, then blushed at her boldness. Luke stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Don't we? In response. June did what was becoming easier each day she stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest where she could hear his heart beating strong and steady. I suppose we do, she murmured. They stood that way in the stable aisle, surrounded by healing horses and the smell of hay and the promise of spring just beginning to touch the winter air. And June thought maybe, just maybe, she understood what home meant after all. Kane Turner rode into their lives on a March afternoon when the Chinook winds had melted most of the snow and the air held the first promises of spring. June was working with a new mare, a skittish bay who'd been used in too many cavalry charges, when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. She knew it was him before she turned around. Something in the confident rhythm of the horse's gait, the way the rider sat his saddle like he owned the earth beneath it. Her hands stilled on the lead rope as memories flooded back Kane at 22, tall and golden and full of promises he'd never meant to keep. June. His voice hadn't changed, still carried that Virginia drawl that had once made her pulse race. June Wyatt Lord above. It really is you. She turned slowly, squaring her shoulders. He'd aged well, she noted clinically. His face had hardened into angular planes, his cavalry uniform replaced by expensive civilian clothes. But his eyes green as spring grass still held that calculating gleam she'd been too young to recognize before. Kane, she kept her voice neutral. What brings you to Wyoming? He dismounted with practiced ease, And she was annoyed to find he was still taller than her, one of the few men who'd ever made her feel small. Business in Cheyenne. Heard there was a woman out this way doing miracles with horses. Had to see if it was really you. Well, now you've seen. She turned back to the mare, who was picking up on her tension and starting to dance at the end of the lead. June, wait. He moved closer, and she caught his familiar scent, bay rum and tobacco and something indefinably expensive. It's been 8 years. Aren't you even a little glad to see me? Should I be? She kept her focus on the horse, but every nerve was aware of his presence. As I recall, you made your feelings quite clear when you left. I was young, foolish. His voice dropped to the intimate register she remembered. The war had just ended, and you were hurt, and I handled everything badly. June almost laughed at the understatement. Handled it badly. As if walking away from her the day after she'd taken shrapnel to her leg was simply poor manners. Is that what you call it? She led the mare toward the stable, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. Instead, he followed, looking around with obvious interest. This is quite an operation. Yours. Mr. Harlan's. I work for him. Harlan. Kane's eyes sharpened. Luke Harlan, I heard his wife died a few years back. He must be lonely, all the way out here with just a hired hand for company. The insinuation in his tone made her stop walking. If you have something to say, Kane, say it plain. I'm saying you deserve better than this. He gestured at the stable, her work clothes, the whole of her life. June, when I heard about you being here, working like a common laborer, I couldn't believe it. You were the best nurse in 3 states. You saved hundreds of lives. And now you're, what, mucking stalls? I'm healing horses that serve their country and deserve better than a bullet for their troubles. She faced him fully now, anger giving her strength. I'm using my skills to help creatures that can't help themselves. I'm building something worthwhile. With another woman's widower. His smile was knowing, cruel. Come now, June, we both know what people must be saying. I stopped caring what people say a long time ago. But the barb hit home, and they both knew it. Luke's voice cut through the tension. June, everything all right? She turned to find him approaching from the house, and her heart did that ridiculous skip it had developed lately whenever she saw him. He was still too thin from his recovery, but he moved with his old confidence, and his eyes were fixed on Kane with wary assessment. Fine, she said. Luke Harlan, this is Kane Turner. We knew each other during the war. Mr. Turner. Luke's nod was polite but cool. He moved to stand beside June, not quite touching but close enough that his intention was clear. What brings you to our ranch? Our ranch. The casual possessiveness in the words made Kane's eyes narrow. Just visiting an old friend. Kane's smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I must say, June, you look different. The years have been kind to you in unexpected ways. June felt heat rise in her cheeks. She knew what he meant. 8 years ago. She'd been gaunt from poor rations and too much work, her legs still healing badly from the shrapnel. Now she was healthy, strong, her body filled out from good food and honest labor. She'd never be delicate, but she no longer looked like she might break. Ranch life agrees with me, she said simply. I can see that. Kane's gaze traveled over her in a way that made Luke stiffen beside her. In fact, I was hoping we might have dinner. Catch up properly. I'm staying at the hotel in town for a few days. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Luke said before June could answer. We're quite busy with the spring foals. Kane's eyebrows rose. I wasn't aware I was asking you, Mr. Harlan. No, June said quickly, sensing Luke's rising temper. Thank you for the invitation, Kane, but Mr. Harlan's right. This is our busy season. Our Kane's smile turned predatory. My, you have settled in here, haven't you? Though I wonder, do the good people of Dry Willow know about your past, about what happened in Tennessee? June's blood turned to ice. Beside her, she felt Luke tense. I was a battlefield nurse, she said steadily. I'm not ashamed of my service. Of course not. But some of those field decisions, well, they might be hard for civilians to understand. That boy from the 32nd Infantry, for instance. What was his name? Private Morrison. June's hands clenched. Private Morrison, who'd begged her to let him die rather than lose both legs, who'd screamed for hours before she'd finally increased his morphine dose, knowing what would happen. The decision that had saved him from days of agony but haunted her still. That's enough. Luke's voice was granite. Mr. Turner, I think it's time you left. I'm only trying to help. Kane spread his hands in false innocence. June's obviously made a life for herself here. I'd hate to see that disrupted by old stories. Is that a threat? June asked quietly. A warning. From someone who still cares about you. He moved closer, lowering his voice. June, you don't belong here, playing stable girl for a grieving widower. You were meant for more than this. You're right, June said, and saw triumph flash in his eyes. I was meant for more than what you offered. Too, more than being hidden away until you found a proper wife. More than being told I was too tall, too strong, too much. I never said. You said it every day, in how you introduced me to your fellow officers, in how you flinched when I stood up straight, in how you left the moment I wasn't perfect anymore. The words poured out. Years of hurt given voice. But here I'm exactly right. My strength is valued. My skills matter. I'm not to anything, I'm enough. Kane's handsome face twisted. You're fooling yourself. You think this man sees you differently. He's using you for cheap labor and convenient comfort. When he's done grieving his precious Sarah. The crack of Luke's fist against Kane's jaw was sudden and satisfying. Kane stumbled back, hand going to his face, shock replacing arrogance. You'll not speak her name, Luke said calmly. Either of their names. Now get off my land before I forget my manners entirely. Kane straightened, touching his split lip with disgust. I see. Well, June, when this all falls apart and it will remember I tried to warn you. He looked between them, something ugly in his expression. Though I suppose some people are meant for better things, and some are meant for this. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. June stood frozen, watching him go, her chest tight with a mixture of anger and old pain. June, Luke touched her arm gently. Are you all right? You hit him, the words came out wondering. He insulted you. He threatened you. Luke flexed his hand, knuckles already bruising. I should have hit him harder. He'll make trouble. He's the type to spread stories, especially if his pride's wounded. Then we'll face it together. Luke turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. June, I don't care what happened in Tennessee. I don't care what decisions you had to make in the war. I know who you are now. Do you? The doubt crept in despite her best efforts. Maybe Kane's right. Maybe I am fooling myself, thinking I could belong somewhere, thinking anyone could see me as more than... Stop! Luke's hands moved to frame her face. You want to know what I see? I see the woman who saved Ghost when everyone else gave up, who gentled Sergeant back to trust, who fought death itself to keep me here. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. I see the woman I'm going to marry, if she'll still have me after my barbaric display. That was barbaric. June found herself almost smiling. Luke, I've seen bar fights that were worse. Well, I'm out of practice. Next time I'll do better. There won't be a next time. Kane's leaving, and good riddance. She covered his hands with hers. Though I should look at those knuckles, you might have cracked something. Worth it, Luke said firmly. The way he looked at you, like you were something he'd owned and lost. I wanted to do much worse. They walked back to the house together, June tending Luke's bruised hand with the same care she showed all wounds. As she wrapped his knuckles, she found herself speaking. Private Morrison was 17, both legs shattered beyond saving. In a proper hospital, he might have survived the amputation, but in a field tent with limited supplies. She tied off the bandage carefully. He begged me to let him go, said he'd rather die whole than live in pieces. So I gave him enough morphine to sleep, and then a little more. Luke's unbandaged hand covered hers. You gave him mercy. I took an oath to do no harm. You kept it. Forcing him to suffer would have been the harm. He squeezed gently. June, you made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. That's not a sin, that's courage. Kane was one of the officers who reviewed the case. He agreed I'd done what was necessary. But afterward, he looked at me differently, like I was dangerous, unnatural. She laughed bitterly. A woman who could make life and death decisions without falling apart. What kind of wife would that make? The kind who'd fight for her family, who'd stand between them and harm, who'd make the hard choices to keep them safe. Luke lifted her hand to his lips. The kind I'd be proud to stand beside. June looked at this man who'd defended her with his fists and his words, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw. You really aren't afraid of me. Afraid, June? I'm in awe of you. Daily? His smile was crooked. Dear, though I am slightly afraid of what you'll say when I tell you I've moved the wedding up to next week. Luke Harlan. Judge Harrison had an opening, and after today, he sobered. I want it official. I want the whole world to know you're not alone anymore, that anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me. June thought of Kane's threats, the old stories he could spread. Then she thought of Luke's unflinching acceptance, the home they were building together, the horses that needed them both. Next week, she agreed. But I'm wearing my good dress, not some frilly thing from town. Wear your work clothes if you want. I'll marry you in the stable if that's what makes you happy. And June believed he would. This man who'd taken one look at her too tall, too strong, too much and seen exactly enough. The church will be fine, she said, and was rewarded with his brilliant smile. Though we should probably warn Reverend Phillips, after your last encounter. He'll behave, Luke said confidently. Or I'll remind him about first stones again. They laughed together, the shadow of Kane's visit already fading. Outside, the horses called to each other across the pastures, and spring continued its slow arrival on the Wyoming plains. And in the kitchen of a ranch house that had seen sorrow and was learning joy again, two people planned a future neither had expected but both desperately wanted. The confrontation came 2 days before the wedding, in the middle of Dry Willow's main street. June had ridden in alone to pick up supplies, leaving Luke to work with the new foals. She was loading sacks of oats into her wagon when she heard the whispers start. That's her, Mrs. Morrison's voice carried clearly. The one who's bewitched poor Mr. Harlan. June kept loading, her movements steady despite the anger building in her chest. She'd weathered worse than small-town gossip. I heard she killed a boy in the war. This from Mrs. Phillips, the Reverend's wife. Gave him too much medicine on purpose. And now she's trapped Luke Harlan into marriage. Probably been warming his bed all winter. Mrs. Morrison's tone dripped vicious satisfaction. My husband says she's been living in that stable like an animal. June straightened, turning to face the cluster of women. They had the grace to look startled at being confronted directly. Ladies, she said evenly, if you have something to say about me, I'd prefer you say it to my face. Mrs. Morrison recovered first, drawing herself up with righteous indignation. Well, I never... Such boldness only proves what we've been saying. You're not fit company for decent people. Because I work with horses, or because I saved men's lives during the war. Because you're unnatural. Mrs., Phillips burst out. "A woman should be gentle, delicate. You're too big, too strong, too capable." June stepped closer, and several women stepped back. "Yes, I am all those things. I can lift a grown man, birth a foal, and stitch a wound that would make you faint. I've held dying boys while they called for their mothers and made decisions that haunt me still. And you know what? I'm not ashamed of any of it." "You should be." Kane's voice came from behind her. He emerged from the hotel, looking fresh and well-dressed, his jaw showing only the faintest bruise from Luke's punch. "June, these good women deserve to know what kind of person is joining their community." "Kane," June's voice was ice. "I thought you'd left." "I couldn't leave without ensuring your welfare." He turned to the gathered women with practiced charm. "Ladies, I knew Miss Wyatt during the war. While her service was admirable in its way, there were incidents, decisions that might concern you, given her proximity to your families." "What incidents, Mrs.?" Morrison leaned forward eagerly. Kane's smile was poison. "There was a young soldier, barely more than a boy, both legs mangled beyond repair. Rather than attempt to save him, Miss Wyatt chose to ease his passing with enough morphine to stop his heart." The gasps were predictable. June stood straighter, refusing to show how the words cut. "His name was Timothy Morrison," she said clearly. 17 years old, from Ohio. He'd lied about his age to enlist. He begged me to let him die whole rather than live in pieces. I held his hand while he passed, and I've prayed for his soul every night since." "You see," Kane addressed the crowd that had gathered, "she admits to murder." "I admit to mercy." June's voice rang out. "I admit to making an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. How many of you have watched your children suffer? How many would do anything to ease their pain?" "That's different, Mrs." Phillips protested. "Is it because I didn't have the luxury of clean hospitals and proper medicines? I had a tent, a saw, and boys screaming for death rather than face life as cripples who'd be begging on street corners." June looked at each woman in turn. "Judge me if you want, but until you've held a child and they were all children by the end while they bled out in your arms, you don't get to tell me what I should have done." "Pretty words," Kane interjected. "But the fact remains, you took a life, and now you've attached yourself to Luke Harlan, a grieving widower who's clearly not thinking straight. These people have a right to protect him." That's when June saw Luke approaching on Brandy, riding hard. Her heart sank. She'd wanted to handle this herself, to prove she could stand on her own. But when he dismounted, he surprised her. Instead of confronting Kane or the crowd, he simply walked to June's side and took her hand. "I see the welcome committee has gathered," he said mildly. "Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Phillips, ladies, Mr. Turner." The last name came out like something scraped off a boot. Mr. Harlan." "Mrs." Morrison began. "We're only concerned for your welfare. This woman—" "My fiancée," Luke corrected firmly. "Soon to be my wife." "But the things Mr. Turner has told us—" "Are none of your business." His voice remained calm, but June felt the tension in his grip. "However, since you seem determined to stand in judgment, let me share some truths of my own." He looked at Kane directly. 2 months ago, Major Garrett from Fort Laramie inspected our operation. He was so impressed by June's work with the traumatized horses that he's sending us more. Horses the Army gave up on, that June is bringing back to useful life. "Horses aren't people," Kane protested. "No, they're often better." Luke's smile was sharp. "They don't spread gossip or twist the truth for petty revenge. Mrs. Phillips, wasn't it your nephew who came back from the war missing his left arm? Tell me, would you rather he'd died whole on some battlefield?" The Reverend's wife flushed. "That's not—" "And Mrs. Morrison, your own brother serves at Fort Laramie. Ask him about the horses we've saved. Ask him about the mare ghost, who was scheduled for termination before June healed her. Ask him about Sargent, who's now gentle enough for children to pet. This isn't about horses, Kane interrupted. You're right. Luke turned to face him fully. It's about a man who can't accept that June chose someone else, that she built a life without him, that she's found a place where her strength is valued instead of hidden. I'm trying to protect her. From what honest work, a home, people who respect her. Luke's laugh was bitter. No, Mr. Turner, you're trying to punish her for not needing you anymore. Luke, June said quietly, it's all right. Let them think what they want. No. He turned to address the crowd. You want to know what kind of woman June Wyatt is? She's the kind who works 18-hour days to save creatures everyone else gave up on, who stayed up 3 nights straight when I was injured, fighting infection and fever, who treats my ranch hands with the same respect she'd show a governor. He paused, looking at each face in the crowd. She's the kind of woman who had to make impossible choices in war and lives with the weight of them every day, who could have become bitter and cruel but chose compassion instead, who looks at broken things and sees not what they were or what they've lost, but what they could still become. Pretty speech, Kane said, but it doesn't change what she is. No, it doesn't. Luke smiled then, genuine and warm. She's strong enough to lift me when I fall, skilled enough to save lives others would let slip away, brave enough to stand between me and 1,000 pounds of angry horse, and kind enough to show mercy when justice would be cruel. He raised June's hand to his lips, kissing it in full view of everyone. She's exactly the woman I want to spend my life with, and if any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to shop elsewhere for your horses and veterinary needs. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Luke's ranch provided horses to half the county, and June's growing reputation as a healer had people bringing animals from 3 towns over. Mrs. Morrison huffed. Well, I suppose, if Major Garrett approves, the Army knows her value. Certainly. Luke's tone suggested the matter was closed. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a wedding to prepare for. Reverend Phillips, I trust we'll see you at the church on Saturday. The Reverend's wife tugged at her husband's sleeve, whispering urgently. June caught the words, best horses in the county and donation to the church roof fund. Of course, Reverend Phillips said finally. The church is open to all who seek God's blessing. The crowd began to disperse, though June could still hear whispers and feel the weight of stares. Kane alone remained, his handsome face twisted with frustration. This isn't over, he said quietly. When he tires of playing savior, when he realizes what you really are. What I really am, June said, finding her voice at last, is a woman who chose herself over you, who learned that being alone was better than being ashamed, who found someone who sees her clearly and loves her anyway. Loves you, Kane laughed. He pities you. Can't you see that the grieving widower and the masculine nurse, playing house while the whole town laughs behind your backs? Luke moved so fast June barely saw it. One moment Kane was sneering, the next he was on the ground. Luke's hand twisted in his collar. You will leave, Luke said, each word precise and cold. You will not return. You will not write, telegraph, or send messages. If I hear you've so much as whispered June's name in any town between here and the Mississippi, I will find you, and I will explain proper manners in ways that don't involve words. He released Kane with a slight shove. Standing and straightening his coat, do we understand each other? Kane scrambled to his feet, his dignity in tatters. He looked between them, and June saw the moment he realized he'd lost. Whatever power he'd once held over her, whatever shame he'd tried to resurrect, it was gone. You deserve each other, he spat, and stumbled away toward the hotel. Luke turned back to June, and she saw his hands were shaking slightly. I'm sorry, I know you can fight your own battles, but when he... June silenced him with a kiss, there in the middle of Main Street, in full view of anyone who cared to look. When she pulled back, Luke's eyes were wide with surprise. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me, for defending me, for knowing when I needed to stand alone and when I needed someone beside me." "Always beside you," he promised. "Never in front, never behind, beside." They finished loading the supplies together, working in companionable silence while the town gradually returned to its business. Some people still stared, still whispered, but June found she truly didn't care. Let them talk. She had work to do, horses to heal, a life to build with a man who saw her not as too much or not enough, but as exactly right. As they drove out of town, Luke reached over and took her hand. "2 more days," he said. "2 more days," she agreed, and found herself smiling despite everything. In 2 days, she'd be June Harlan, not because she needed a man's name for protection, but because she'd chosen to join her life with someone who understood that her strength wasn't something to be hidden or ashamed of, but celebrated. Behind them, Dry Willow continued its gossip and judgment. Ahead lay the ranch, the horses, and a future that looked nothing like what either of them had planned, but everything like what they needed. The change came gradually, like spring warming frozen ground. June first noticed it 3 weeks after the wedding, when Mrs. Baker from the neighboring ranch brought her daughter's pony for treatment. "Heard you worked miracles with the cavalry horses," the woman said, almost shyly. "Little Belle here's been limping for a month. Doc Pemberton said to put her down, but my Emma won't hear of it." June examined the pony carefully, finding an abscess deep in the hoof that had been missed. "It's treatable," she assured Mrs. Baker. "Painful for a few days while we drain it, but she'll recover fully." "Thank God." The woman's relief was palpable. "And thank you, Mrs. Harlan. I'm sorry I believed, well, what people were saying. You're nothing like they claimed." It was the first crack in the wall of town opinion. As Belle the pony recovered and returned to carrying delighted Emma Baker around their ranch, word spread. June Harlan. It still felt strange to think of herself that way, had saved a beloved pet when the town's only veterinarian had given up. More animals followed, dogs with mysterious ailments, horses gone lame, even a milk cow that wouldn't eat. June treated them all with the same careful attention she gave the war horses, and slowly, incrementally, minds began to change. "It's the children," Luke observed one evening as they watched the sunset from their porch. They'd moved June's belongings into the main house after the wedding, transforming what had been a memorial to grief into a living home again. Parents will forgive almost anything for someone who helps their children's pets. June leaned into his warmth, still marveling at the simple comfort of having someone to lean on. Ghost helped too. When little Tommy Morrison saw her following me around like a puppy, he stopped being afraid. "His mother, though she's still watching you like you might snap and murder us all." "Give her time," June smiled, remembering how Mrs. Morrison had actually nodded to her at the general store yesterday. Fear takes longer to heal than bones. The real shift came with the birth of Dancer's foal. The mare, one of their rescued cavalry horses, had been bred before her injury, and no one knew she was carrying until June noticed the signs. The birth was complicated, the foal was turned wrong, and for hours it seemed they might lose both mother and baby. June worked through the night, her hands and knowledge the only things standing between life and death. Luke stayed beside her, following her instructions without question, and Tom ran back and forth with hot water and clean towels. "Turn her more to the left," June instructed, her arm deep inside the mare, trying to reposition the foal. "That's it. Hold her steady." Dancer groaned, her sides heaving with effort. June could feel the foal's heartbeat getting weaker. "Come on, little one," she murmured. "Your mama's fought too hard to lose you now." Dawn was breaking when finally, the foal slid free in a rush of fluid and motion. For a heart-stopping moment, it lay still. Then June cleared its nostrils, rubbed its chest vigorously, and was rewarded with a gasping breath and a weak whinny. "It's a filly," she announced, exhausted but triumphant. "And she's perfect." Luke wrapped his arms around her from behind, not caring that she was covered in blood and birth fluids. "You did it. You saved them both." "We did it." She leaned back against him, watching Dancer nose her baby with wonder. "All of us." Word of the successful birth spread quickly. Tom, proud of his part in the drama, told everyone who'd listen about Mrs. Harlan's skill and determination. Soon people were stopping by just to see the filly, who June had named Hope for obvious reasons. "She's got her mama's spirit," June told the group of children who'd come to peek through the fence. "See how she's already trying to run before she can properly walk. Just like my little brother." Emma Baker piped up. She'd been a regular visitor since Belle's recovery, drawn to June despite her mother's initial wariness. "Can we pet her?" "When she's older and stronger. For now, just watch and see how her mama takes care of her." The children pressed against the fence, enchanted, and June found herself explaining how horses communicated, how the filly would learn to be brave by watching Dancer. Before she knew it, she was conducting an impromptu lesson on animal behavior, with even some parents listening in. "You're good with them," observed a familiar voice. June turned to find Reverend Philip standing nearby, his expression thoughtful rather than condemning. "Children are honest," June replied carefully. "They see animals for what they are, not what they fear they might be." Perhaps adults could learn from that. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Mrs. Harlan, I owe you an apology. I let gossip and prejudice guide my actions. That was wrong of me." June studied him, seeing genuine remorse in his weathered face. "We all make mistakes, Reverend. The question is what we do after." "Indeed." He smiled slightly. "My wife mentioned you've been teaching some of the children about animal care. We have a space at the church. If you'd ever want to formalize those lessons, the town could use someone with your knowledge." It was an olive branch, and June recognized it as such. "I'll think about it, thank you." As the Reverend walked away, Luke appeared at her elbow. "Did the Reverend just invite you to teach at the church?" "Seems so." June watched Hope take her first wobbling steps, Dancer hovering protectively nearby. "Strange how things change." "Not strange at all." Luke kissed her temple. "They're finally seeing what I've always seen. Although I do selfishly hope you won't get so busy with town children that you forget about our work here." "Never." June turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "This is home. Everything else is just extra." The transformation accelerated after that. June began teaching weekly lessons on animal care at the church, focusing on kindness and understanding rather than dominance. Parents who'd whispered about her began asking her advice on their farms. Even Mrs. Morrison, that bastion of propriety, brought her ancient cat for treatment of a persistent cough. "I still don't approve of your past," the woman said stiffly as June examined the elderly feline. "But I can't deny you have a gift with God's creatures." "We all have gifts, Mrs. Morrison," June replied mildly, prescribing a simple treatment of steam and herbs. Sometimes they're just not what people expect. The real triumph came when Major Garrett returned for his inspection, this time bringing his superior, Colonel Masters. They toured the expanded operation, now housing 20 horses in various stages of rehabilitation, with obvious approval. "Remarkable," Colonel Masters said, watching Sergeant calmly accept a saddle for the first time since his injury. "We'd written these animals off as total losses." "There are no total losses, Colonel," June said firmly. "Only those we give up on too soon." "Indeed." He made notes in his ledger. "Mrs. Harlan, Mr. Harlan, the Army would like to formalize our arrangement. We're prepared to offer a contract for rehabilitation services, with compensation that reflects the value of your work." Luke handled the negotiations while June continued the tour, showing off each horse's progress. Ghost followed them like a shadow, occasionally nudging June for attention, living proof of what patience and kindness could achieve. That evening, as they celebrated the contract with a quiet dinner, Luke raised his glass of cider. To June Harlan, who saves horses and changes minds with equal skill. To partnership, June countered, touching her glass to his, and to second chances. They drank, and June thought about how far they'd all come. The horses who'd arrived broken and violent, now gentle and trusting. Luke, who'd been drowning in grief, now quick to laugh and plan for the future. The town that had rejected her, slowly learning to see her worth. And herself no longer the woman who'd arrived in Dry Willow expecting another rejection. She'd found her place, her purpose, her home, not by becoming smaller or quieter or more acceptable, but by being exactly who she was and finding people who valued that. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, catching her contemplative mood. "About names," June said. "How they called me Big June in the war, like it was something shameful. But Emma Baker called me that yesterday, and she meant it like I was someone special, someone strong enough to save her pony." "You are someone special." Luke took her hand across the table. "You always were. It just took the rest of us time to see it." Outside, Hope whinnied for her mother, and Dancer's answering call carried on the evening air. In the stable, 20 horses settled for the night, safe and healing. And in the house that had learned to breathe again, June Harlan sat with her husband and knew that sometimes the best victories were the ones you never expected to win. "Tomorrow we should start working with the new mare," she said, "the one they say kicks everyone who comes near." "Of course she does," Luke laughed. "Why would they send us easy ones?" "Because easy doesn't need us," June replied. "It's the difficult ones, the broken ones. The ones everyone else gives up on, those are the ones worth saving." Speaking from experience, speaking from living proof. She squeezed his hand. "After all, look what patience did for me." The first snow of winter fell on a quiet November evening. 1 year after June had first arrived at the ranch. She sat on the porch step, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl, watching the flakes drift down like feathers from heaven. The transformation of the landscape from brown to white felt like a metaphor for everything that had changed. "You'll catch cold," Luke said, stepping out with 2 steaming mugs of tea. He'd added honey to hers, just the way she liked it, another of those small considerations that still made her heart squeeze. "I'm too substantial to catch cold," June replied, accepting the mug gratefully. "Remember, that's what Dr. Pemberton said." Luke settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Pemberton's an idiot, though I hear he's been referring people to you for animal treatment." "Only because he has no choice. Word's gotten out beyond Dry Willow." June smiled, thinking of the family who'd traveled 30 miles last week. Bringing a horse everyone said was beyond help. The mare was in the stable now, already showing signs of improvement. "Emma Baker has been telling everyone that I'm the Lady of the Pines who fixes broken creatures." "Lady June of the Pines," Luke mused. "I like it. Has a certain ring." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the fence posts. Inside the stable, June could hear the soft sounds of horses settling for the night ghost's distinctive nicker. Sergeant's contented snort. Hope's playful whinny as she bothered her patient mother. "I've been thinking," Luke said eventually, "about expanding. With the Army contract and all the civilian work coming in, we could build another stable, take in more horses. We... partners. Remember, this stopped being just my ranch the day you saved Ghost?" He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Everything we've built here, we've built together." June leaned her head against his shoulder, marveling at the simple rightness of the gesture. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "When I came here, I thought I was just running to another temporary stop. another place that would eventually decide I didn't fit. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. She lifted her head to look at him. Do you know what Tom asked me yesterday? He said his sister wants to learn nursing, but she's worried she's too tall and strong. He wanted to know if I'd talk to her. What did you tell him? To bring her by. That being tall and strong just means you can help more people. June smiled at the memory. It's strange. Being someone's example of what's possible. Not strange at all. Luke kissed her temple. You've been showing this whole town what's possible since you got here. Showing that strength comes in different forms. That healing happens when we stop being afraid of what's broken. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the world in pristine white. June thought about all the creatures sheltered in their stable horses who'd been written off as lost causes. Now whole and trusting again. She thought about the children who came for her lessons, learning that gentleness was its own kind of power. She thought about the town that had rejected her, then slowly, grudgingly, and finally, warmly accepted her. Luke, she said quietly, do you remember what you told me that night after your fever? Which part? I said a lot of things. You said if I couldn't see my own worth, you'd live your whole life being good enough for both of us. I meant it. June turned to face him fully. You don't have to anymore. Carry worth for both of us. I mean, she touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. Somewhere between then and now, I learned to see what you see. Maybe not all the time, but enough. Enough to know I deserve this life, this work, this love. June, I love you, she said simply. I know I couldn't say it before. I was too scared, too convinced it would all disappear. But I love you. Luke Harlan, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for standing beside me when the world stood against me, for giving me a place to be exactly who I am. Luke's eyes were suspiciously bright. Say it again. I love you. The words came easier the second time, like a dam breaking. I love you for your terrible jokes and your steady hands and the way you talk to the horses when you think no one's listening. I love you for defending me with your fists and your words and your presence. I love you for... He silenced her with a kiss, deep and sure and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and the snow had dusted their hair white. I love you too, he said. Have since the day you stood in Ghost's stall and spoke to her like she was worth saving. Maybe even before that, when you faced down Pemberton's rejection with your chin high and your spirit unbroken. That seems like a lifetime ago. It was... We're different people now. He stood, pulling her up with him. Come on, Lady June of the Pines. Let's check on our horses before this snow gets too deep. They walked to the stable hand in hand, their boots crunching through the fresh powder. Inside, warm and golden with lamplight. Their horses greeted them with soft nickers and gentle nudges. Ghost pressed her nose into June's palm, seeking treats. Sergeant stood proud and calm in his stall, a far cry from the violent, terrified creature he'd been. Hope pranced in her stall, showing off for attention, while Dancer watched with maternal indulgence. Look at them all, June murmured, everyone a miracle. Like their healer, Luke replied. June made her evening rounds, checking wounds, adjusting blankets, offering the comfort of routine and presence. Each horse had a story of trauma overcome, of trust rebuilt, of second chances seized. Just like her own story, she realized, just like Luke's. As they prepared to leave, June paused at Ghost's stall. The mare leaned over the door, resting her chin on June's shoulder in a gesture of complete trust. Thank you, June whispered to the horse, for being the first to believe I was worth trusting. Ghost whickered softly, as if she understood. Back at the house, as they prepared for bed, June found herself standing before the window, watching the snow continue to fall. The world outside was being made new, all the rough edges and old wounds covered in pristine white. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About deserving," June said softly. "How I spent so long believing I didn't deserve kindness, love, a place to belong. How you told me you'd deserve me enough for both of us until I could do it myself." And now, June turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd seen her truly and loved her anyway. "Now I know that deserving isn't something you earn or prove. It's something you choose to accept. And I choose this us, our life, our work. I choose to believe I'm worthy of it all." "Good." Luke's smile was radiant. "Because I have plans for us. June Harlan, more horses to save, more minds to change, more lives to build together." "Together," June agreed, and kissed him as the snow continued to fall, blanketing their corner of Wyoming in peace and possibility. Later, as they lay entwined in the bed that had once been Luke's alone, but was now theirs, June thought about the journey that had brought her here, the wounds of war, the rejections and humiliations, the long, lonely roads between towns that didn't want her. All of it had led to this moment, this place, this love. "Sleep now," Luke murmured against her hair, echoing words he'd spoken so long ago. "I'll deserve you for both of us." "No need," June replied, already drifting toward dreams. "I've learned to deserve myself." And in the stable, 24 horses, each one saved, each one healing, each one a testament to the power of patience and love, settled safe and warm for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horses to heal, new minds to change. But tonight, in a ranch house that had learned to breathe again, June Harlan slept peaceful and whole, finally home in every sense of the word. The woman who'd ridden into Dry Willow, convinced she was too much for any place to hold, had found her answer in the most unexpected way. She hadn't needed to become less. She'd needed to find people who saw her as exactly enough. And in Luke's arms, surrounded by the quiet breathing of healing horses and the soft fall of cleansing snow, June knew she was no longer the woman trying to earn her place in the world. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about June and Luke's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Wild West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, redemption, and second chances in the American frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.